Good evening, everybody. Paul Gatter here. Tonight, we're going to discuss a very important topic: what the recent Supreme Court decisions and upcoming decisions, how it will affect Indian country. I've got a great guest tonight, so stay tuned for that, as well as some special announcements. So look forward to that in just a few minutes. Hello, everybody. Post in the comments, let me know where you're watching from. Really excited to bring you a special topic tonight with a special guest, Rebecca Nagle from This Land Podcast. Really important topic, and I'm excited for you all to hear exactly what is going on.
Man, how about a run?
Good evening, everybody. Paul Gatter here from PowWows.com. Thank you all for being here. So tonight we want to discuss Roe versus Wade and some of the other Supreme Court decisions that are coming and how that's going to impact Indian country. Rebecca Nagle is the host of This Land Podcast, and she's been following the Supreme Court for several years. She's a citizen of Cherokee Nation, and she has been studying this because it had some of these cases that recently were decided had a direct impact on her tribe and whether or not their reservation was deemed legal. So look forward to that in just a minute. I do have some announcements first, and I want to say welcome. So, hey, Trish, see Chad from Alabama is watching. Lulu Bell from Salem, Massachusetts. Thanks for being here. Hello from Oklahoma. It's great to see everybody. Veronica, good evening. I see Missouri, Kentucky. Lorraine from the United Kingdom. It's great to have you here. Kiowa Nation. All right. Got some Kiowas in Utah. All right. Some folks in Novalee in Hawaii. That's awesome. Thanks, everybody. Keep posting in the comments. I'd love to see where all people are from. We're very spread out tonight. This is awesome. And also want to say I'm wearing my new hat tonight, College of Charleston Cougars. Tomorrow, we will be leaving and moving my daughter in, starting her freshman year at the College of Charleston here in South Carolina. She'll be a couple hours away, not too far, but far enough that tomorrow night is going to be a little tough for us, and especially next week when we have an empty house for the first time in a long time. It's going to be hard. Any other empty nesters out there, people sending their kids off to college, I'd love to hear from you. I told a friend of mine today, we're probably going to need a support group. It's going to be a rough one, but I'm excited for her to start her new adventure. And it's going to be fun. Just got to get through tomorrow and the move in. It looks like it's going to be raining. And if you're familiar with Charleston, South Carolina, it is a very low-lying area. So they're already predicting flooding. So it's going to be fun getting stuff moved in those kind of conditions. But I guess it could be worse. It could be hot. Thank you, Novalee. Appreciate that. All right. So first announcement, if you liked the video we were watching in the beginning, please head on over and check out our YouTube channel, PowWows.com/YouTube. We literally have hundreds of videos just like that one. We're still posting and still uploading all the videos we recorded from the 2022 Gathering of Nations powwow. And that was one of the ones from this year's gathering that we were playing. So head on over to our YouTube channel and check that out. We've got a lot more like that. Angela was watching from Germany. Oh, that's awesome. We got more Europe folks watching. All right, second announcement. We are giving away this 8th generation blanket. Check it out. It is a great blanket. Thanks to our friends at 8th Generation for these awesome blankets that they produce. All native made company, all native designed. Check it out. You can enter to win over at PowWows.com/win. You can enter daily for more chances to win. The contest ends at the end of August, so be sure to get your entries in before the contest ends. That was a lot of ends. But yeah, PowWows.com/win. There's lots of ways you can complete and do tasks to get more entries. So check that out. And good luck. Go Cougars. Thank you. They so they don't have a football team, but they do have a basketball team that's apparently pretty good. So we might try to head to some basketball games this year and follow along and see how they do. All right. Let's see. Any other announcements? If you're new to PowWows.com, thank you so much for being here. This is your place to come and learn, explore, connect, and anything to do with Native American culture. That's what we're here for. Whether you are involved in powwows or not, or just looking to reconnect with your culture, or if you are just wanting to learn more about Native culture, that's what PowWows.com is for. We want to be your gateway to get in there and experience Native culture. The best way to do that, of course, is by heading to a powwow. And so there are lots of powwows near you. There are plenty of those happening. Be sure to check out our powwow calendar, PowWows.com/powwows near me. That'll get you on our mailing list. And twice a month, we will send out updates to our calendar. Literally dozens and dozens of events happening. The summer is always busy with powwow season, but lots of events being added for the fall too. So check our calendar often to get the latest information, or subscribe to our newsletter and we'll send them right to you. All right. And if you're new to powwows in general, we have you covered there too. Head over to PowWows.com/powwow101 and we'll take care of you. We will send you a few emails to let you know what powwows are, what to expect at your first powwow, the etiquette, what the dancing is, the singing, all those kind of things, and really help you get up to speed before you head to your first powwow. So check that out. And one last promotion here before we get to the main topic tonight. Here are the ways that you can help us, and we really do appreciate all your help and want to say a special thanks to our Patreons. Those are the folks that are making a contribution each month on our Patreon. We'd love for you to join that community. We're having a lot of fun over there with our Patreons. So check that out, PowWows.com, and you can join those folks. Howard says, where are you located? So I am in Lexington, South Carolina. All right. So let's talk about tonight's interview. Like I said, Rebecca Nagle is the host of This Land podcast. She's a citizen of the Cherokee Nation in Oklahoma. And she has been following the Supreme Court and some of the decisions. She has produced 2 seasons of her podcast. The first covered a court case that went in front of the Supreme Court, the McGurk decision, I believe, or case, which really was challenging the tribal reservations in Oklahoma. And the state of Oklahoma was arguing that the reservations had been disbanded and that the state had jurisdiction on those reservations. Her second season, she followed the Indian Child Welfare Act. If you're familiar with that, that has to do with adoptions of Native children and how that is being challenged in the Supreme Court. And there's a pending case that she'll talk about in the interview that really will have major implications depending on how that is comes out. These decisions are major things for Indian country. So however you vote, it is really important that you do vote and that you are educated on how important these Supreme Court nominees are. The makeup of the Supreme Court has changed drastically, and she talks about that a little bit and how that has changed what is happening as far as what Indian policy and Indian law does. So I hope you'll watch this, be sure to share it. Let's let other people know about what's going on. And I do have to stop for a second. So Dorinda asks, okay, so I should mention that. I'm sorry, I meant to mention that in the beginning. The AJ Bear situation. So AJ Bear is a Jingle dress dancer who posted this week that she was leaving the circle because of bullying. I've been around the PowWow circle for over 20 years now, and there's no place for that in the circle. I don't know all the details of what happened. I hope she will. I hope she will come back and dance again one day, and I hope she is able to get away from all of that. In any group of people, there's always going to be some negative people, but there's no place for it in the circle. Of course, we stand with AJ and really support her, and I hope she will get through this okay. That's tough, and that's a tough decision for somebody like her who's been involved for so long, and been a great dancer, to step away. So we'll keep her in our prayers. And if you want to know more about that, head over to Facebook. We've shared one of her posts about it. But yes, Dorinda, I did want to say it, and I meant to mention that earlier. So thank you. Okay. So anyways, here is my interview with Rebecca Nagle about the issues surrounding Indian country and Indian law. So with recent court changes and decisions like what just happened with Roe v. Wade, I know that there's a lot of issues right now swirling around tribal legal issues. And as soon as I saw some of the responses to Roe v. Wade dealing with tribes, I was like, there's no way I'm going to get a handle on this. I've got to go to the person I know who's keeping a kind of finger on the pulse of this. So thanks again for spending some time with us here on PowWows.com. It's been crazy, right?
Yeah, it's been a crazy season at the Supreme Court, and I don't think the big decisions are over. I think we'll see a lot next term too.
Yeah, and that's what I wanted to talk about, is kind of where are we going. But before we get there, if anybody hasn't listened to your podcast, I hope they will go and check out the 2 seasons. So let's catch up. The first season of your podcast dealt with a criminal trial that kind of had some impact there on Oklahoma tribal sovereignty. Has that changed at all? Has there been any updates with that case?
Yeah, so in July of 2020, for people who aren't familiar with the case, the Supreme Court ruled that Muskogee Creek Nation still had a reservation, had always had a reservation that had actually never been abolished or gotten rid of by Congress. Although Oklahoma had acted that way for over a century, that wasn't the law. And so that decision led to subsequent decisions here in Oklahoma state courts that affirmed the reservations of 5 other tribes, including my tribe, Cherokee Nation. And so now much of the eastern half of the state of Oklahoma is acknowledged and considered a reservation. Basically, what we've had since the decision, unfortunately, is a lot of backlash here from state officials in Oklahoma, really led by the Governor Stitt. So one of the things that the governor did to try and fight that decision was petition the Supreme Court dozens of times to actually overturn it. So he thought with Ruth Bader Ginsburg having passed away and Amy Coney Barrett joining the court, he could get a different outcome, which is kind of extraordinary. The Supreme Court didn't go along with that, but what they did do is they granted cert to a case called Castro Huerta v. Oklahoma that asked this very narrow question. I mean, it actually has big applications. So it's a narrower question than overdoing the whole McGirt decision, but it is a case that will have big implications on criminal jurisdiction, not just in Oklahoma. But basically in the Castro case, the Oklahoma asked the Supreme Court to still have criminal jurisdiction over crimes committed on tribal land where the defendant is non-native and the victim is native. And normally those crimes can only be prosecuted either by the feds or by tribes under the Violence Against Women Act. But Oklahoma won. In June, the Supreme Court issued its decision. So now states actually across the United States, not just here in Oklahoma, have concurrent jurisdiction. And again, it's a little complicated, but it's over crimes where the defendant is not Native and the victim is Native. That's where criminal jurisdiction has changed because of Castro.
Yeah, that one, it's still recent. How is that playing out? Are we going to start seeing, state troopers on reservations patrolling?
Yeah, I think that's a really big question. Here in Oklahoma, our reservations, we have a lot of, for people who are familiar with allotment and how like reservation land works, we already have a lot of fee land, and the majority of folks living on our reservations are not tribal citizens. And so which is part of the frustration of everything that's happened at the Supreme Court, is that we had cross deputization agreements with police. We had kind of sorted that system out. But yeah, I think it's a really big question for reservations where there has not been the presence of state law enforcement. What is that going to look like?
Right.
And I think we know from basically what Castro did, it's, this is oversimplifying it somewhat, but made every state kind of like a PL 280 state, where the state and the tribe and the feds have concurrent jurisdiction over certain crimes. And what we know from PL 280 states is that when there's a ton of overlapping jurisdiction, especially because Native victims often don't get the same attention and resources as non-Native victims, that everyone just passes the buck. And so it doesn't actually lead to more safety, or it hasn't historically led to more safety for Native victims. So we'll see what the impact of Castro Huerta is. But I think the other thing that is a reason to worry about the decision is the way that the Supreme Court justices worded it. And so they could have kind of just looked at, okay, like here is why, states do have jurisdiction over these crimes, blah, blah, blah. But they went very big picture, and the language is really sweeping. And so Kavanaugh, who's the Supreme Court justice who wrote the opinion, said things like, Indian country is not separate from the state. Tribal land isn't separate from the state. It's part of the state. Like things like, states have inherent jurisdiction on tribal land unless Congress has said that they don't, not the other way around, where states only have jurisdiction where it's been granted by Congress. And so those are some really, really big, it's a really basically big assertion of states' rights, and saying that states' rights trumps tribal sovereignty and even kind of comes before what Congress has said. And so that's what's very scary about the decision is this, I think time will tell. And I think really we'll know a year from now, because of some decisions that the Supreme Court are going to hear next term. Is this just a weird decision that's a departure, or is this a decision that is charting a new course, and the Supreme Court is going to continue down that course in subsequent decisions, which could be really damning for tribal sovereignty?
Yeah, it's interesting to see the states' rights issue get pushed in a lot of these cases. And this won't be confusing at all. I'm sure it'll all work out just fine, right? Adding more people to the mix, yeah, surely that won't make jurisdiction less complicated. Oh man, that's crazy. Okay, so let's switch to season 2 then. Where are we with the Indian Child Welfare Act?
So there is a case, I think it's been consolidated under Holland v. Brackeen, but a lot of people have probably heard it called Brackeen v. Holland, or just the Brackeen case. And it is a case brought by 3 white foster families who wanted to adopt Native children that they were fostering, and the state of Texas. And so that group of people are suing the federal government, saying that ICWA violated their constitutional rights and that it should go away entirely. So they're trying to strike ICWA down. They've had mixed success in the lower courts and the appellate court. And so now it's been appealed all the way to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court agreed to hear the case last winter, and it'll be argued on November 9th in Washington, D.C. And then we will likely, we never have a guarantee from the Supreme Court, but barring anything really unusual, we'll likely hear the decision in June of 2023. So in a little bit less than a year from now.
Okay. So that one, we're kind of still waiting to see how that's going to shake out. Okay.
Yeah. And that's where the Castro decision is scary, because they are making a much stronger states' rights argument in the ICWA challenge. So the state of Texas is coming in and saying ICWA violates the constitutional rights of the state of Texas. And, the federal government can't tell, child welfare proceedings they're controlled by states, and the federal government can't come in and tell states what to do. And what's scary is that there's a lot of laws that Congress sets that really govern the relationship between states and the tribes. And really, when you think about our sovereign indigenous nations, when we signed treaties, we weren't signing treaties with the state of Texas or the state of Oklahoma. We were signing treaties with the U.S. federal government. And so just like the state of Oklahoma can't go off and, recognize, Palestine as a country, or establish separate diplomatic ties with Russia, or have anything to do with U.S. foreign policy. The arena of federal Indian law is fundamentally a relationship between two sovereigns, and that's a nation-to-nation relationship, not a relationship between the states and the federal government. And so it's scary if the Supreme Court is interested in rewriting that, is interested in rewriting 200 years of case law and constitutional law, because we know, just for us as Cherokees, we were driven from our homeland by the state of Georgia. Allotment happened, really at the hands of settlers in Oklahoma, then the territory who were advocating for it. And so we have not had a happy track record of dealing with the states, and I'm sure other people's tribes have similar stories. And so that's one of the things that's really scary about the Brad-Keene case.
Yeah. Yeah, it's going to have big implications. And you start rewriting 200 years of policy. What scares me is all of the policies and things that we're not even thinking about yet that somebody's going to find, and there's going to be some kind of weird thing that comes up that we're really not even looking at, because we're looking at these other things. Yeah, that's when it gets really, really scary. All right, now let's switch to more recent. The Supreme Court, really shocked a lot of people. And this has been a cornerstone case, a decision that nobody thought would ever get overturned.
Yeah.
They overturned Roe v. Wade, and immediately, I saw on social media posting things about how this is going to affect tribes. And one of the first things I saw posted, and I wanted to get, your opinion on this and kind of where this is going. But, you started seeing people saying, oh, well, tribes are now going to become the abortion clinic home for the country. Is that even possible? And or do tribes even want to get into that?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. And I want to back up and just to highlight one more thing about the Brad-Keene case, because there's the states' rights argument, and then the plaintiffs, the foster families, are also claiming that ICWA discriminated against them. And so, we often talk about tribal affiliation and tribal citizenship under the law being a political classification, not a racial classification. So I can go and get my glasses at the IHS clinic or get my teeth cleaned because I'm a citizen of Cherokee Nation. And that's a political relationship. And what the individual plaintiffs are saying is saying, no, it's not about tribal citizenship. It's about race. And therefore it's unconstitutional because we can't treat people differently based on race. And what's really scary about that is that if the Supreme Court upholds it, it could undermine, it's called Title 25, but it's basically like the book that all the laws that dealing with, federal Indian law go under, it could undermine all of that. And just one last thing on that is that the big corporate law firm who brought this lawsuit that's supposedly about the welfare of Native children and about their concerns with ICWA has already filed the lawsuit to try and gut Indian gaming and make it so that tribes can't operate casinos where non-native casino developers can't. They've already filed that lawsuit, making the exact same arguments that they're making in this ICWA lawsuit. So they're not even trying to hide their hand, that it's not really about children, that it's about chipping away at tribal sovereignty, which is sad because these kids are just pawns in a bigger fight over money and resources. Yeah. And so what I want to say about abortion is, I think I saw Stacey Weeds, who's a fellow citizen of Cherokee Nation and a law professor, make a really great tweet, and a few other Native leaders kind of tweeted out similar sentiments in response to the, abortions on tribal land. Right. Which is that we don't have full sovereignty over our land, just like what we're talking about with Castro and states being able to prosecute certain crimes that happen on tribal land. And so if folks are going to fight, if folks want to benefit from tribal sovereignty but don't want to fight for it or don't really know even what it is, I think there is a really big disconnect in that moment, right? And so, there might be situations where some Native women living on tribal land may not fall under state jurisdiction and have an extra layer of protection, but it really depends. But, any non-Native person performing or obtaining an abortion on tribal land would be still subject to state jurisdiction. And so, I think the other really big issue to point out is that because of the Hyde Amendment, Native women already who are using IHS to access healthcare don't have access to abortion care. And so that's a really big issue. And then the last thing that I'll say on that is that there's a group out of the Southwest called Indigenous Women Rising, and they're an abortion fund specifically for Native women. And so Native women who might need financial help because of limited access to abortion, often that's travel, to actually access an abortion. Indigenous Women's Rising is a place where people can donate if they want to do that.
Yeah. Like we've been talking about, jurisdiction is a really complicated issue, whether it's criminal, civil, or health related. I saw a lot of people saying things like, well, there's tribes now that are able to open dispensaries and sell marijuana, or they're able to have gaming, which those are against states' rights or states' laws in those areas. So why can't they open up abortion clinics? And I don't think it's that simple. Because too, then you get into, again, what you were saying is that service going to be rendered just for people affiliated with that tribe, or is it open to the public? Yeah.
And I think it depends on the state and how the law is even worded in the states, because abortion bans are, different legal statutes. But I do think there is some area to explore in helping Native women access abortion on tribal lands, because we would not be subject to state prosecution. But there's still, some risks involved in that.
Right. And you already have states passing laws for not letting the people in their state travel to get abortion. That's going to be a whole other challenge of lawsuits too, because can states really restrict interstate commerce at that? I don't know. This is going to be a mess for a while. All right. So with that decision, and like you said, we already know that the Supreme Court is taking up some other cases coming up soon. But with this shift, what are the other cases that we're seeing on the horizon that we're starting to worry about, that may, like you say, may start ticking away at sovereignty and these legal issues?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that the Brackeen case is really the big one, and a worst case scenario for tribal sovereignty in Brackeen is that a year from now, ICWA is gone. ICWA has been declared unconstitutional. We no longer have the protections of the Indian Child Welfare Act. And the decision was worded in such a way that other challenges to other laws, whether it's the Indian Gaming Regulatory Act, NAGPRA, if we're a racial group and we can't be treated differently, how can we have our own elections? How can we have our own land? What racial group gets to have its own police force and its own court system? I mean, it's just, where does that line, what racial group gets to have their own bodies of, land and reservations that they can self-govern? I mean, where does that stop? And so I think a worst case scenario in Brackeen for tribal sovereignty is a decision that gets rid of ICWA entirely and sets up a domino effect so that those next cases that come challenging Indian gaming or challenging funding for IHS are set up to win based on the decision in Brackeen. And like I said, they've already filed the Indian gaming case. And so I think that I think that if folks are concerned about what the Supreme Court is doing, people really need to have their eyes on Brackeen. And I think I think everyone within the United States who's concerned about Indigenous rights needs to pay attention to this case. And I think within Indian country and within our tribes, we really need to be preparing. A lot of people thought that the Supreme Court would never overturn Roe, and there were a lot of people who were saying, no, like, this is really possible. Like, why would they even grant cert in this case if that's not what they wanted to do? And they were called alarmists, and now we're seeing the ends effect. So I think it's scary to think about what's possible, but I think to prepare our communities and also to just look at it realistically and look at what this court has already shown it's willing to do, both in the arena of federal Indian law and Castro, but then some of the other decisions that really depart with precedent. I think when we see what this court is willing to do, I think that kind of decision is really within the realm of possibility.
And I don't follow it as close as you and others do, but for individual members of the court, with in the past 10 years or so, with other Native issues that have come up, are we seeing a change in how some of these members are voting, or is it just that the majority changed?
Yeah, I mean, if you look back, going back a long time, tribes have not fared well at the Supreme Court. So the last time I looked at the data, which I think was 2018 or 2019, we had lost about 2/3 of the cases that we had brought to the Supreme Court. And I think you see, to look at it very big picture, for a long time within the United States, Congress was the body that was chipping away at Indigenous rights. It was like the executive branch and the War Department doing those things too. Passed the Indian Removal Act, came up with some of these federal policies. And what we've seen since through Native activism has really shifted to where we got a generation of policies from Congress that benefited Indigenous people because of the leadership of, Indigenous folks in the 70s and since then. Now what we've seen is that the part of our government that chips away at Indigenous rights has ironically become the Supreme Court. And so we have decisions, the reason, it's one of the reasons that jurisdiction is such a mess on tribal land is because of Oliphant. And so, and that's not, it's not 100%. That's a very big generalization. And so there have been really important Supreme Court decisions that have stood firm with Indigenous rights, like the McGirt decision in 2020. But then there's also been decisions that have really undermined Indigenous rights. And so it's really hard. I think it's really hard. What we had with McGirt and a few other decisions that happened within those years was a different Supreme Court than we have now. And so Ruth Bader Ginsburg was replaced by Amy Coney Barrett. And so we'll have to see right now, and we'll also have to see what Biden's new nomination, Justice Jackson Brown, what her record will be like. And so it's, it's complicated. And it's also hard. Like, I think the other thing is that Indigenous issues, when we talk about the Supreme Court, often we talk about, liberals versus conservatives and how the Supreme Court leans. And you can't really do that math with Indigenous issues because we've seen liberal justices. I think she shifted some towards the end of her tenure on the court, but Ruth Bader Ginsburg she wrote City of Sherrill decision, which was awful for Indigenous rights. And then we have Gorsuch, who wrote the McGirt decision, wrote the Castro dissent, and is a pretty staunch, I hate to say that he's a supporter of Indigenous rights. If the law says that a nation has a right, he doesn't make up a new rule to avoid what the law says. That's the standard that Gorsuch uses, is following the law.
Yeah.
And so, so we'll see. I mean, I think that, we'll see. So it's hard to talk about, a lot of times people talk about the Supreme Court being 5-4 or being 6-3. And I think when it comes to tribal sovereignty, the makeup of the court is more complicated than that.
Right. And, I hear a lot of people calling for the expansion of the Supreme Court or things like that. And we don't know yet if that really would help. Yeah. Because these don't always fall. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think there's a reporter called Lisa Graves who's done a lot of really great reporting on how much money organizations like the Federalist Society put into creating the Supreme Court makeup that we have today. And so I think when you get into actually how we got where we are, this idea that the Supreme Court isn't political, that it exists outside of politics, rings hollow. I'll just say that.
Right. People's United, right? It changed
how
campaign funding is done. And I agree. I don't think people understand how much money is really being spent on a local and national level. And to a large extent, that some of these things that are happening on a local level are even scarier. I was just watching a video, totally unrelated, but just watching a video where a small town is now defunding their library because 0.001% of their library books were LGBTQ related. And so, you have, and it was, again, they raised massive amounts of money and did this huge media campaign in that town. There's a lot of money being poured into some of these issues. And like you said, some of this is really smokescreen for larger issues where, if Indian gaming is chipped away, we're talking about other corporations that can now get into some of that. And then we're talking about millions and, billions of dollars that are flowing away from Indian country and into politics again. It's scary to say that how much money can influence this. And I've seen, like you said, I've seen some people starting to do the research and going back and showing just how much of a push this was for conservatives and how much money they've been spending over a long period of time to build up to this point where they could overturn Roe. And then you start thinking about, so what's their next target? What other landmark decision could they go after? And there are some ones out there for Indian country that could be targeted.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So what, from a legal perspective, being in the middle of this, are you, we talked a year or so ago, you were optimistic about the McGirt case. Where are you now? I mean, are you feeling not optimistic at all? Or, what's the outlook for this in your opinion?
Yeah, I think that it's mixed. I think it's unfortunate that instead of having a political posture of wanting to work with the tribes and make the decision work and do, kind of what's best for all Oklahoma and really work in those partnerships, the current administration of Oklahoma, Governor Stitt, has instead taken the public position that, you know, McGirt was a disaster, that it should be overturned. And as a result, a lot of the working relationships between the tribes and Oklahoma have broken down. And I would say at the top level. And, you know, for my reporting, I've talked to district attorneys, I've talked to tribal prosecutors, I've talked to sheriffs and law enforcement. And what I found is, while a lot of the rhetoric at the top is antagonistic when it comes to public safety in Eastern Oklahoma, there are, on the local levels, absolutely places where it's difficult and where tribes, I think, are not experiencing a lot of cooperation. But there are also a lot of places where there is a lot of cooperation, and tribes here, the 5 tribes here in Eastern Oklahoma, you know, have gone from prosecuting, you know, dozens of cases in a calendar year to thousands, and have really expanded the court system. And I think are also doing some things, you know, a lot of what we're doing is just trying to catch up. But, you know, Choctaw Nation is trying to have a drug court that focuses more on rehabilitation than punishment. So tribes are also thinking, well, how can we go back now that we have more jurisdiction? How can we go back to our values? And so I think, I also think that there's a lot of opportunity, you know, here in Oklahoma. When Oklahoma became a state, Congress passed a series of laws where not only we lost land, but we lost, you know, control over our schools. We lost, and as a result, we lost language. We, you know, it broke up communities. It was an initial wound where we had a slow bleed for a century. Right. And to me, I feel like McGirt doesn't fix all of that. It doesn't reverse it. You know, it doesn't give land back to families who lost it through the corruption and predation that dominated the allotment era. But it does stop some of that bleeding and helps tribes, you know, in this process of us rebuilding. And so I do still feel optimistic about what the legacy, like when we look back 20 years from now, 50 years from now, I think that we'll look back and we will remember the McGirt decision as one of the most important decisions for tribal sovereignty. And I think at the same time, it will be because tribes have had to spend a lot of time and resources defending it, which I think is unfortunate, but it's where we're at. Yeah.
And so one of the other things I've seen a few people mention with the overturning of Roe, people are saying that maybe, you know, the Biden administration and Congress now need to pass some laws and codify and protect abortion. But with some of these Indian Child Welfare Act, there is a code of laws, and now we're talking about cases that could overturn years of policy that are written. So when that happens, there is really no easy fix for that. I mean, there's not something, you can't just pass another law. These are massive pieces of legislation that would have to be rewritten, right?
Yeah, I think you know, I mean, it's trying to predict the future, which is dangerous.
Right.
But I do think that, you know, a lot of reproductive advocates and reporters were saying, hey, like, people need to think about what is going to happen when the Supreme Court overturns Roe. And people, you know, and a lot of folks at the time said, oh, no, that's not going to happen. And I do think that it's a worthy exercise to think, okay, if in this case the Supreme Court overturns ICWA, what's next? What does that look like? You know, immediately, what can tribes still do to protect their children? You know, a lot of, it's interesting that Texas is bringing up the states' rights argument, because a lot of states have their own state version of ICWA, or a lot of states have taken parts of ICWA and incorporated it into their own child welfare code. And so, yeah, I do think that we need to think about, again, how just, you know, what the possible outcomes are, and try to be prepared for that.
Yeah, I agree. It's time to start playing those what if games, and start really looking at these possibilities.
Yeah. And I think, you know, people have also floated the idea of a Castro fix with Congress. You know, I think I think when you read the Castro decision, the judicial logic is it's a pretzel. I mean, it doesn't make a lot of sense. And so I think we might need to think about what is, if the Supreme Court is going to go this far, and kind of departing from precedent and departing from the law, where else can we go within the U.S. federal government, where the law and where the constitutionality of tribal sovereignty is something that is still upheld? Yeah.
Right. Oh, there's a lot still to come, but thank you for spending at least a few minutes to try to get a handle on all this. I said in the beginning, when all of this really started breaking out, I was like, I really want to get somebody that can come on here, because we're getting these questions asked, and I can't answer them. So thank you for coming on and answering some of these questions. We'll have to check back in a few months. Like you said, maybe June of 2023 when we get a decision there, and we'll know more.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Is there a new season of the podcast coming, or anything coming out?
Well, there will be update episodes. So if folks want updates as the case is headed to the Supreme Court, you can subscribe anywhere you get your podcasts. Just look for This Land and hit subscribe, and then you'll get the updates.
Awesome. All right. Thanks so much.
All right. Thank you.
So, was that complicated enough? So these cases are extremely complicated, but have huge impacts on what's going to happen for Indian country. So please go check out her podcast, educate yourself on what's going on. And like many people in the comments were saying, yes, it is super important that you vote. Get out there and vote, and tell others to vote. We have to get involved, and somebody else said, and it's important to get involved on a local and national level. There are lots of these policies are being done on a local level, on the state and the county level. So that's where you have to start, and that's a great place to get involved. If you want to really get involved in politics and affect change, that's a great place to do it. I do appreciate all the comments, lots of good discussion there. So thank you for being here and listening to that. Don't forget to enter our contest, PowWows.com/win. We are giving away an 8th generation blanket, so enter that daily for more chances to win. And let's keep the conversation going. I'd love to hear your thoughts and discussions. If you're watching on the replay, continue to post in the comments, and we'll check those out. But thank you all for being here. I hope you enjoyed this. It's a little bit different of a topic than what we normally do in the past, but I thought it was really important to bring Rebecca on. She's now been a guest for 3 times on the show, so it's super exciting to have her back. Really, like, she's so knowledgeable and can unpack this stuff so much better than I can. And I'd never really understood how they are trying to separate some of these cases based on race discrimination, and how they're trying to undermine Indian law by making it a race issue and not a political tribal affiliation issue. That should scare everybody. Yeah, that can affect everything. Anyways, she does a great job of explaining that. So I hope you enjoyed Rebecca being on the show tonight. Hope you all have a good week. Wish me well tomorrow. I will be moving the daughter to college. So wish me luck on that. Hope you all have a great weekend. Hope you get out to a powwow and are able to spend some time with the family. Thank you all for being here again. I'm Paul Gowder with PowWows.com, and thank you so much for your support.